Hello, everybody. My name is PSA Amigo, or you can just call me Mark. I just wanted to do a little video talking about basically my journey on with my disease and getting to the point where I'm at now, where I've decided to try alternate treatment, vegan treatment, and really how it got there. I'm planning on doing this like a series. My goal is to shoot for just a few minutes. Definitely not trying to go longer than 20 minutes or something. Maybe like 10 to 15 minutes. Where I just talk about my early onset with my disease and the kind of treatments that I took. I don't know if I'm allowed, honestly, to talk about the medicines I took. I don't know if I can get in trouble for that. But I'm gonna go ahead and do it. I think it's fair for somebody to be able to talk about the medications they're using. I'm not gonna slander any medications or anything like that. I'm because to be honest, they helped me at a very early age when really there wasn't a whole lot of research or a whole lot of people talking about other ways to treat your psoriatic arthritis. So I don't know how many times I'm gonna do this. I don't know if people are gonna like this kind of discussion, but I just really wanted to have an opportunity to talk about my disease and the effects that it had on me growing up. So to start, I guess we have to go all the way back to, let's see, I think I got the disease in 2007 or 2008. I'm not too sure, but what I do remember is I was between the ages of 14 and 15. I think it was in the summer of those years. I'm 25 right now, so about 10, 11 years ago. And it came out of nowhere. That's all I remember is the psoriasis came first, and then my knee blew up to the size of a cantaloupe, and I'm not exaggerating. It was that bad. And it's kind of weird when I think about it, because there was no, at least from my understanding, no onset of any sort of disease up to that point, but there was a transition if I think back on the things I was doing at that age, the stuff I was eating. I think that age in particular, 14, 15, I was going through a lot of physical and mental changes. So I talked briefly about my past. I don't like getting into it too much, but I came kind of from a dysfunctional household. It was really difficult on all of us. I was in a big family, about six of us, four kids, including myself. And I got into doing drugs and alcohol at a pretty young age. I was 12 years old when I started doing marijuana and drinking vodka, and I was experimenting with things that I should not have been experimenting with at the time, especially now that we know what the effects of marijuana is on a young mind. And during that time, I was away from home all the time. So this is, 2 years before the disease came. But I think it has an important role in maybe how the disease came about, because if you know anything about psoriatic arthritis or rheumatoid arthritis, you know that juvenile arthritis historically has been an extremely rare event, and it only usually occurs with women. So for it to happen to a boy was even more rare. And there's a long story with that too, and finding out, there was a long time before anybody even knew what was going on with me. And this was back in Texas, mind you. Now I'm living here in California. But so I was doing a lot of drugs, doing a lot of alcohol, and I was eating a lot of bad food. There had to have been days on end or without end of me eating basically convenience store or gas station food. So it was not absurd for me to eat, those fried burritos, fried chimichangas. fried corn dogs, pizzas from gas stations. We had one in my town. And getting home and mom making big batches of spaghetti with just regular pasta, canned tomato sauce, and um, you know the thing is, back in Texas, barbecuing was a big thing too. So I was eating a lot of meat. And I'm not totally convinced that it was the meat aspect of my diet that brought about my sickness, but I think what happened is I sort of shocked my system with drugs, and marijuana wasn't the first drug that I messed around with. I just about took, except for like heroin and hard drugs. I did just about, pills and cocaine and marijuana. I was doing all of these things at a really, really young age, to my shame. And I was eating horrible food, right? Like, nobody's gonna live, day by day. I mean, maybe people do, but usually you're not gonna be feeding your kids, a gas station food on a daily basis. But that's what I was eating. And it wasn't really my parents that were feeding me that. It was me out with my friends or my cousins, getting high, getting drunk, and walking down to gas stations and getting food and eating a ton of food, bags and bags of chips. I mean, you've heard the lore behind Munchies, right? And that's basically what I was doing. And all of a sudden, I started getting the notorious red, bright red, or dark red, bloody, scaly patches on my back and on my head. And it was basically as bad as it is now, except now it's quite worse. But in terms of where the psoriasis was located, it was in the same places, except for the nose. The nose was a development that happened a couple years ago. But if you look at these images that I put up on my forehead, that was where my psoriasis was 10 years ago. And in terms of the scale, like, of my scalp that's covered with psoriasis. Right now, we're talking November of 20th, 2018. My psoriasis is about 95% of my scalp. 10 years ago, it was the forehead, the back of the ears. It was actually under my neck, a lot worse than it is now. So my psoriasis has migrated. But my scalp was definitely not as bad. But I did have the forehead about the same as I have now. My back has progressed, definitely. I had one spot on my back, about the center of my back, when I was about 14. And so, after a couple years of, like I said, doing these drugs and drinking a lot of alcohol and partying at a really young age and eating bad food, or sometimes going days without food and then eating bad food, I started getting these patches all over my body. And I didn't really talk to my mom about it. I didn't really explain what was going on to anybody. But I knew I had it. I knew I was starting to have a dandruff issue. But when you're, a kid, you don't really understand that you could be starting to cope with a disease. Or at least I didn't. I just thought, oh, I have dry skin. I have, irritable dry skin. I have... my back has dry skin as well or something. So I don't know. I didn't really think like, oh, I got a disease. And on top of it all, I was quite active. I played football. I lifted a lot of weights. I did powerlifting in high school. But before I got to high school, at 14, I played football basically from 7th grade all the way to my senior year, with a mild break my freshman and sophomore year. And next discussion, I'll talk about why I had such a big break between my freshman and sophomore year. But so I'm 14 and I'm starting to get these patches on my head. And I'm starting to get these patches on my back. And I don't understand what's happening. And slowly but surely, this thing gets worse. And I start getting psoriasis, like in my groin area. I start getting it in my armpits. Not really my stomach, not really my chest. You see that now a little bit, a couple spots. But my head started getting worse, and we're talking about like big patches on the top of my head, itchy patches, bleeding patches. And at school, this was pretty difficult for me because uh, you know I'd have people commenting to me about, hey, you should think about using Head and Shoulders, and I'm like, one, we had it, right? We had Head and Shoulders at my house. I got my mom to buy some. We thought it would work. Of course, it's not going to work. It's not. Has nothing to do with what I thought it was. And then I distinctly remember the moment that my knee swelled up, that the arthritis came. I distinctly remember it. And surely enough, I was drunk or, tipsy or whatever. I think I was closer to 15 at this point, and I was jumping on a trampoline, and I was, laughing and playing with my cousins, and we were like, intoxicated and being dummies. And I tried to do a front flip, and I did a front flip. I've done them before. You do that little front flip on the trampoline, and then you land on your feet, and I landed on my feet, but my knees bent all the way, where my heel was touching my butt, and it kind of felt uncomfortable. I don't think it popped or anything, but it felt uncomfortable. And I remember just sitting on the trampoline moaning, like, "Oh, that hurt!" Right? Something hurt a little bit, or something just was off about that landing, and uh basically the back of my knee started kind of feeling irritated, like swollen, uncomfortable, and the top of my knee, I would say like where the quadricep meets the kneecap, that area was starting to get irritated too. And it was basically overnight. I get home, I sleep, my knee is swollen. And so I'm thinking, okay, I did a front flip. I, tore my meniscus. Maybe I, tore my ACL or whatever it was. I wasn't too sure, but I thought I was like, okay, I hurt myself. And so I didn't say anything again because as a kid I was doing a lot of bad stuff, and I was like, I'm not gonna really say anything to my parents. So I didn't tell my parents anything. And I went to school, and my knee was I was just trying to muscle through it, the uncomfortableness of basically having a swollen knee. For those of you who don't have disease, but you want to know what it feels like to have like a rheumatic arthritis in one of your joints, it basically feels like your knee is like a balloon filled with water. And, and yet you want it to function the same way that it's supposed to function without having all of that liquid inside of it. And so I'm walking around, kind of limping around. It's a little past football season, so football season had passed luckily at this point, and uh, yeah, I was just having this knee problem, and it wasn't anywhere else at that point. It was just my left knee. And so, without getting into all of the details, I finally came forth to my mom. I said, "Mom, I'm having a problem with my knee, and it's starting to hurt at this point." And she goes, "Okay, let me see." And I show her my knee, and she lets out like a little gasp, and she's like, "What did you do?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. It just started getting swollen." And so she takes me to my what's his name? Not pharmacist. My physician, right? And I'll call him Dr. A. I know what his name is still because he was a really cool dude. But he's out in Texas, in San Angelo. You can find him. I'm not gonna say his name, but his name was Dr. A. And he was a pretty smart dude. He hated football. He hated the fact that I played football. And he was never afraid to remind my mom, like, do you understand the neurological damage that you're letting happen to your kid? But when you're in Texas, if anybody's from Texas, football is like the blood life of Texas. I mean, Texans love to play football, and I still, love football. I watch the NFL. Maybe not this season because my team is terrible. But anyways, I digress. She takes me to my physician, and he has no idea what's going on. The only thing he can guess is, okay, It looks like maybe he tore his meniscus because he's having swelling. He's having irritation when he's walking. Were you doing something? And I dropped, the truth that, yeah, I was jumping on the trampoline. Oh, okay. He was like, oh, cut me off. Yeah, it's probably an injury. We need to get him in, do an arthroscopic surgery. I think that's what it's called. That's where they open up your knee. They just little hole, and then they put like a little camera inside, and they see, what's going on with your knee. So they put me under. They put a camera in my knee, and I talked to the I forget what it is. Is it a radiologist? I'm not too sure, but the guy who gets all of the camera footage and the X-rays and MRIs, and thinking that this was an injury. And I go to this guy, and he sits in the room with us, and he's like, I don't know what this is. I don't know why it's swollen. We drained all the fluid out, but we have no idea why it's getting swollen. And he says, his knee's beautiful. I distinctly remember him saying that. It was kind of weird, but he was like, he has a beautiful knee. Everything looks fine. There's no tears. There's no damage. The knee itself looks fine. Looks beautiful. I don't know. I think maybe you need to see a rheumatologist. Maybe this is something else. And so my physician really didn't think to send me to a rheumatologist. And granted, I don't blame him. I was really young. I was 14, 15 at the time, I think. And I don't think anyone was thinking that this person could have arthritis. And granted, I didn't tell him about the rashes on my head or anything. So nobody has seen these rashes on my head except for my mom. Actually, no, she hadn't seen them either. I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember this as accurate as possible. So nobody knew. I was kind of hiding it. And so I go and I see a rheumatologist in Austin, Texas, because there wasn't anyone at that time that would take our Medicare at the time. I think we were low income household, so we were using the CHIP. I think that's what it's called, the CHIP system, or I don't know what it is now, but it's basically for low income families. So nobody would take it, anywhere within 50, 60 square miles around us. So we had to go all the way to Austin, Texas to see this, high class specialist. And he takes a look at my knee, and he's kind of really quiet, and he grabs my hands, and he looks at my hands, and he's like, okay, I see bone overgrowth that's consistent with people who develop arthritis. He looks at my nails, and he goes, okay, it looks like he has some ridges in his nails. That if you don't know, if you have ridges in your nails, meaning that your nail is not flat, that something's wrong. You have a deficiency, a mineral deficiency, or you're sick with something. And I say, I also have this rash. And I just remember saying that. I also have this rash. And he turned around, kind of snapped his head, and he kind of looked at me inquisitively, and he said, where? And I say, well, I have it on my head. And he said, okay, can I see? And I was like, yeah. He comes over, separates my hair. I had a lot of hair at the time because I was scared for people to see my psoriasis. And looks at my head, takes one look, and he goes, oh, okay, he has psoriatic arthritis. And but then he corrected himself and says, he has juvenile psoriatic arthritis. And it was like you could hear a pin drop in the room, because I'm, a young teenager. And my mom at the time, I'm sure she knew, because arthritis runs in my family. Like, oh my God, he has arthritis. And he goes, I'm not going to say my mom's name, but the doctor looks at my mom and says, it's really rare. It's very rare. It's juvenile arthritis. It's even more rare for a boy to have it. Usually it only happens with girls, or it's more likely to happen with girls than boys. And she's like, okay, what can we do? And he's like, he's going to have to start taking steroid. that's the only advice he gave. And again, I'm like I mentioned before I got into my story, and it looks like we're already at 20 minutes. Sorry, but um, we're not. I didn't hear anything about nutrition. I didn't hear anything about turmeric being good for people with arthritis. Turmeric helping you know alleviate inflammation. What I heard was what we have right now. My mom is that we have these biological steroids that we can start him injections right away. I'm gonna go ahead and say they started me on Humira at 15. He said they're not. It's not good. We're not. It's not good to start them this young. But really, we don't have any other options. So we're gonna go ahead and start him with that. We're going to give you some topical treatment. At the time, they gave me an oil-based clobetasol treatment with the shower cap. Um, and we're going to start him on this biological treatment. And she goes, okay, so he's going to be fine. He's going to be fine. He's like, yeah, he's going to be able to live his life. He's going to be able to live a life. But I'll never forget, he said, but I have to tell you, honestly, what this means. This means blatantly that your son's going to walk with a cane by the time that he's 30. And I have to tell you that. He's going to be using a cane by the time that he's 30. And at that point, my mother broke down in tears, and my stepfather was giving her a big hug. And that was the beginning of my journey with biological treatment. And, to end this part of the story, I always kind of want to end with a reflection. I just wish, this doctor had the education, the nutritional education, or I wish that the people like John Madison were around doing this, 11 years ago. Because at that time, there was no campaigning for any alternative ways to treat yourself. But I wish that it happened, because that set forth a series of events where I would basically be dependent. My life would be dependent on steroids, all the way up until a few months ago. Until my wife found John in July of 2018. That's how long that one discussion affected my life. And I don't blame the doctor. I'm not here to do that. But what I'm here to say is, I think we have an issue, a big problem, because you're talking about putting a steroid into the body of a teenager, into somebody who was, I think at the time, I was I was a freshman at that time. And remember, I said next time we'll talk about why I took a 2-year break from any sort of physical activity. You could probably start to guess why. But it definitely had something to do with my disease and my psoriasis. And, but anyways, when I reflect on that moment, I always think, like, I wish he had told me, like, I don't want to start him on steroid. Even if he would have just said, not until he's like 18 or 21, because that's when the male body stops growing. That's when I want to start him on. Let's try to get anything and any other way to treat this person. Turmeric, ginger, garlic. Let's try to figure out any way to treat this kid, because I was a kid, than to give him steroid. Because to do that, you stunt the growth of a teenager. You mess with the hormones. You mess with my testosterone. You hurt my liver, which is still growing. You hurt my kidneys. And the sad thing is that this is still happening, and it's going to keep happening, because the doctors don't know, and people don't know, although they're starting to learn now, that in the views of medicine, there was no other option. And the question I want to ask for everybody to think about is, how can we get the message around to these kids, these parents, and these doctors, uh, that there are other ways. That they might not be the most, you know, more. I don't know, even know how to explain it. They might not be the ways that make life easier, right? You might not be able to eat burgers and pizza, whenever you want, but at least you're not taking these steroids, which are carcinogenic. That's a fact. They are, especially at a young age. There's not a lot of research on them. All we know is that they control the symptoms. So I'll leave you guys with that. I know I bled on a little bit longer than I wanted to. We're at, I think, 25 minutes. I get carried away. Please forgive me. I get carried away when discussing this topic because it's my life. And I hope you guys enjoyed, ladies and gentlemen, and that you liked this kind of discussion, and that you think about subscribing. I don't have really good software. If you're listening, I just got this new microphone from Amazon. It was $30. I think it sounds a lot better than what I was using before. I don't have any video recording software. I don't have a webcam. I'm basically doing this all off my laptop. So I'm trying to sort of build this up a little bit so that I can actually afford to get, a decent PC that doesn't crash when I was trying to stream this whole thing, but it just wasn't happening on the laptop. So just think about subscribing, and always, please, if you have any questions, just message me or comment down below. And thank you so much for listening, and I thank you so much for letting me share a little bit about my life. And I hope that this gives you the courage to talk about yourself, your health issues, and what you've gone through. Take time to tell me this story too, because it was finding these communities of people who have what I have, or something similar to it, and who are brave enough to say, hey, I have this disease too. Look at my body. Look at what's happening to me. This helped me. Can this help you? I really appreciated that. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again next time.